available in paperback and e-readers. Isis, Dark Incubus. The goddess next door gets enthralled in a romantic entanglement with an evil incubus in this all-new Isis series adventure. Get your copy of Isis, Dark Incubus in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback and Kindle, All About Marilyn. Learn all about the struggles of a faded former teen sitcom star in this absolutely fabulous 5-star screenplay. Get All About Marilyn in paperback and Kindle on Amazon.com today. Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis. One of my viewers wanted me to do another installment in the Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis series. Now, this installment of the Hollywood Historical Women in Crisis series is going to be a companion to a video of a Hollywood Historical Men in Crisis series video about musician John Lennon, and this video will focus on the women in John Lennon's life, such as Julia Lennon, Mimi Smith, Cynthia Lennon, and Yoko Ono. Now, the first Hollywood Historical Woman in Crisis I'm going to be talking about is John Lennon's mother, Julia Lennon. Now, Julia Lennon is the mother of John Lennon, the legendary musician of the 20th century who was a part of the iconic 20th century band, the Beatles. Now, Julia Lennon basically, even though her son John got great success, put him on the road to becoming a man in crisis due to the dysfunctional life situation she wound up being raised in. Now, Julia Lennon was born Julia Stanley in 1914 and was the fourth of 5 sisters, and in that family, those girls did fairly well until the mother wound up passing away. That's when the entire family situation that was doing fairly well wound up falling apart, because even though the father, George Ernest Stanley, who had retired from the Merchant Marines and found a job with the Liverpool and Glasgow Salvage Association as an insurance investigator, he provided for his family and gave them a nice suburban home. Unfortunately, without the mother there for them in 1945, what happened is, as these girls were growing up in their adolescent years, they didn't really get that guidance from a woman to help them navigate a course to womanhood, and sadly, Julia Lennon wound up on a road without a mother there to give her guidance, where she wound up falling for the charms of Alfred Lennon. Now, Julia Lennon really reminds me a lot of the black girls in the inner city who wind up, because they don't wind up getting guidance from their mothers, because the mothers see them as competition. What happens is the girls don't get the guidance on how to be able to get involved with men, and they wind up falling for a guy who winds up not being a man who is capable to be a husband or a father. Now, as Julia Lennon was out as a teenager out here, she got involved with Alfred Lennon, who was John Lennon's father, and Alfred, who they called Alf, was a guy who was like the black male Pookies, who was just out here joking and never really taking life seriously. Now, Alfred Lennon never really took life seriously because he was not taught proper male life skills or male survival skills, and he did not understand how to lead as related to relationships as a teenager, because he had grown up in orphanages and growing up without a mother or a father to give him any sort of structure. So for him, everything was a joke, and it was a joke because he was trying to compensate for his inability to take responsibility for himself. And as he was visiting Liverpool's theaters and cinemas, he eventually got to know a lot of the usherettes by name, and eventually he got involved with Julia Stanley. And as he got involved with Julia Stanley at 14 years old, he really wasn't ready for manhood, but as he got involved with her, eventually everything was about him having fun, and just everything was a joke. And as they got involved with each other, Julia was basically drifting with this man for over 11 years, which really was a red flag as related to courtships, because usually a man, when he's out here and he has good male life skills and male survival skills and has an understanding of his role in God's order, he can set a course and a direction for himself. But Alfred Lennon didn't know how to do these things, and as he got involved with Julia Stanley's father, who was still alive, was still trying to vet this man, but sadly, this woman got emotionally attached to this Pookie. Again, similar to the way black girls get involved with Pookie. And as they got emotionally attached, he tried to find a way to provide for his daughter and find a way to get his daughter to be provided for. But Alfred Lennon, like many black males, even though he was a white English male, resisted this because his father tried to get him a job, but he just turned it down because he didn't want to have that job because another man gave it to him, because he had no respect for male authority or male authority figures. And since he had no respect for male authority or male authority figures or the structures of manhood, he walked away from that job. And then he thought, oh, this job was meant to take him away from Julia. But the whole thing was the job was meant to help him build a foundation so that they could have a stable life the way he provided for his family. Unfortunately, with him, this Alfred Lennon, he wound up getting a job with the Merchant Marines. And as he got a job with the Merchant Marines, eventually he only got the job because of the pressure from the father, and that was the pressure he put on him because he wound up getting married to her after they got married. He really didn't have a course or a direction, as related to things as related to his life. And that showed because she stayed at her parents' house after the marriage and he went back to his boarding house. He had no real place for them to be. And then after the marriage, he then went back to sea, spending 3 months on a ship bound for the West Indies. And over that time, what he did was go out and he was out here just living his life. Didn't really care much about Julia. Didn't care much about financially supporting her, and signed on again as this merchant marine who was just drifting around. And after he did his time as a merchant marine, he then eventually came back and then got Julia pregnant. And as he got Julia pregnant, he then continued to be this merchant seaman, sending out paychecks regularly and showing a pattern that happens with many black people in the black community, where you have dudes who think they can just send money and that takes care of a child, but he really wasn't thinking about caring about the child's emotional needs or caring about building or leading a family. Again, behaviors very similar to Pookie, in that you have a male who was out here and he just was out here doing his thing and just sending money to the kids, but not really caring about how his family was coming together. And that really showed as he disappeared in 1943. And after he disappeared in 1943, he basically just abandoned his family. And after he abandoned his family, he then basically wrote a letter to Julia telling her that she could go out here and pursue other people. And that's basically what Julia wound up doing. Julia wound up getting involved with another soldier as she was out here dancing and partying. And as she was out here dancing and partying, she participated in hypergamy that she was given permission to by Alfred Lennon, who basically, like Pookie, didn't want any responsibilities as a man. So what he did was tell her to go out here and get involved with other men. And eventually she got involved with this Welsh soldier named Taffy Williams, and as she got involved with this Taffy Williams, she eventually wound up getting pregnant by Taffy again. And as Alfred Lennon came back, this is where we started to see a lot of dysfunction, because Alfred Lennon, after she got involved with Taffy Williams and got pregnant by him, this is where things wound up coming to a head between Alfred Lennon and Julia Lennon. And eventually what happened was what led to the ultimatum that Alfred Lennon made as related to his son. What he did was go and make this ultimatum saying that either his son could go and be with him or be with his mother. And he was being really disingenuous because he wanted to go to New Zealand and basically just get away from the responsibilities of his family. And he knew that the son would go to his mother. So what he did was give this ultimatum so he could get away from taking responsibility for his family. Now, after Alfred Lennon basically abandoned his family, Julia Lennon basically had 2 kids by 2 different fathers, no different than many of the black females out who were in the ghetto, having 2 kids by 2 different men. And this is what led to the birth of Victoria Lennon, John Lennon's half-sister. Now, as John Lennon's half-sister was born, this is where Julia got monkey branch to yet another man to get her needs met in John Bobby Albert Dinkins. And as she got involved with John Bobby Albert Dinkins, who was a well-dressed man, who was a wine steward and had lived very well, she decided to get with this man. And as she decided to go and get with this man, she wound up getting with this man. However, with John Albert Dinkins, he didn't want to have John Lennon in his life. He did not want John Lennon in his house. And he didn't want John Lennon in his house because he didn't want to have another man inside of his home. And this is typical of men who have established themselves. They don't want to take care of other men's children. And this is basically what put many of these kids in jeopardy. And this is what happened with John Lennon, where his mother was told that she couldn't have this man, a boy, around. And this is where John Lennon was sent to live with his Aunt Mimi. And as he was living with Aunt Mimi, he was raised by Aunt Mimi, and she was basically coming to visit him, providing him with a dysfunctional home, similar to the homes that many black women have when they go out here and have their man. Whenever black women have their man, their sons are basically pushed off on other people because she wants to maintain herself being taken care of by this other man and this other man's resources. And this man wants to build a household with that woman. And the whole thing is that as John Albert Dinkins got with her, she showed that she was not really responsible. She was just a very unreliable person. Again, typical to many black women's stereotypes that they have out here. This white English woman was participating in them and not knowing how to cook, not knowing how to clean, not knowing how to even do basic responsibilities. No, she didn't know how to do these things. And even though John Bobby Albert Dinkins wanted to try to build a household with her, he found himself impeded because even though he was trying to build a household with this woman, she didn't understand her role as a helpmeet, and she didn't understand her role as a helpmeet and be able to help this man as related to the needs. I mean, this man basically was looking to try to find a woman to provide with them, but the whole thing is this woman was not responsible at all because she was just, again, a dysfunctional woman from minute one because she had been involved with Alfred Lennon and this other man, Taffy Williams. Again, she had already been bonded with the spirits and DNA of other men, and John Bobby Albert Dinkins basically was the final simp, and this final simp basically got involved with her and had 2 daughters, Julia and Jacqueline. And as he tried to build a family with her, sadly, he could not really build a family with them. Again, he would try to do this, but the whole thing is there was no way for him to be able to make a relationship work. And this guy, Dinkins, basically sadly wound up dying. And he wound up dying in a car crash. And this basically left Julia alone once more. And it left Julia alone once more as his mother. And his mother basically was raising these 2 kids. And raising these 2 kids, even though John Lennon had success, her life was basically a failure because she had three sets of kids by 3 different fathers. And again, in the black community, they would say this woman was no good. But here we have a white English woman, even before the time of the feminist movement, participating in the same dysfunctional behavior that they say black women participated in, and was continuing to participate in this behavior. And as they were participating in this behavior, raising one generation of kids to be just as dysfunctional as they were. And that's what was happening with the whole situation with Julia Lennon. And again, Julia Lennon, sadly, she wound up losing her life on July 15th, 1958. And she went to go visit John Lennon, but John Lennon wasn't there. He was at a roadhouse. And as she was out here, she was basically hit by a car. And as she was hit by a car by a guy who was an inexperienced driver, and this is what led to the death of Julia Lennon. And after Julia Lennon wound up dying, John Lennon, who was a mama's boy who didn't know about the ratchetness of his mama, very similar to what happened with the late Tupac Shakur, John Lennon basically had a bond with his mama and tried to hold that bond. But the whole thing is, as he was in dysfunction, he never really coped with the passing of his mother. And after his mother passed away, he started drinking heavily, getting into fights, consumed by a blind rage. And as he was out here after his mother passed, he wound up going from being on the road to becoming a boy in crisis to winding up becoming a man in crisis. And the whole situation with Julia Lennon shows us what happens when a boy is raised by a woman in crisis. We get a boy going from generation to generation, and the dysfunction being passed on from generation to generation, because if a boy's first teacher teaches him dysfunction, that dysfunction puts him on the road to being a boy who grows up to become an eventual man in crisis. Now, the second Hollywood historical woman in crisis I'm going to be talking about is Julia Lennon's sister, Mimi Smith. Now, Mimi Smith was the oldest sister of Julia Lennon, and she was the aunt of John Lennon, who was the one who raised him when his mother and his father basically abdicated parenting him. Now, Mimi Smith had to come in to try to raise John Lennon because Julia Lennon basically had gotten herself into a situation with Alfred Lennon. Now, when Julia Lennon married Alfred Lennon, she already knew that he was a person who wasn't in a place to provide for his children and had no real interest in providing for the children. And this was known at the courtship. Now, he went out here and got this job as a merchant marine and sent money after he found out about the pregnancy that led to the birth of John Lennon. But by 1943, he was basically gone. And after he was gone, he gave Julia Lennon permission to pursue another man, and this is where she got involved with this Taffy guy, and Taffy eventually got her pregnant with another child, and this led to a situation which led to Alfred Lennon looking to try to end his relationship with Julia Lennon by giving John an ultimatum of whether he would go with him to New Zealand or he would stay with his mother. And again, this was him being disingenuous, and as he was being disingenuous, he eventually wound up with his son staying with his mother, and he could be free to go to New Zealand to do whatever he pleased. Unfortunately, this put John Lennon in a very bad situation, and a very bad situation that Mimi Smith stepped into to try to clean up, and this is where Mimi Smith wound up showing us the pattern of dysfunction that led to her winding up becoming a woman in crisis. Now, Mimi Smith had been known for cleaning up messes from the days when she was first born, because as the firstborn daughter, she had to come in and basically clean up a mess as related to her family when, sadly, her mother died and her father needed somebody to help take care of the children. And as she looked to try to be a leader and a teacher to her sisters, taking whatever she had to try to help out her other sisters, what eventually happened with Mimi Smith is she became a surrogate mother to her sisters and eventually wound up becoming a woman who had to look out for her sisters' health and safety, even when they weren't looking out for themselves. And that's what happened to Julia Lennon. She was just out here running these streets after getting involved with Taffy and having a daughter, Victoria. She had this daughter. She then got involved with Albert Bobby Dinkins, and as she got involved with Albert Bobby Dinkins, she then was having John Lennon, her first child, in the bed, sleeping with her and her husband, and that's where Mimi stepped in and called social services twice because this was not a healthy situation for a boy to be in, because this could lead to a baby boy eventually winding up dying because he did not have a crib. And again, didn't have a crib because the mother didn't know how to be responsible. And as she was out here, she didn't know how to be very responsible at all. And as she was involved with this what I call final simp in this Albert Dinkins, she was looking to again maintain her economic resources, but she wasn't looking out for the health and safety of her children. And that's where Mimi had to step in and look out for John Lennon's safety. And as she looked out for John Lennon's safety, eventually she was given custody of John Lennon because Albert Bobby Dinkins did not want this child that was from another man showing him the face of another man in front of him. So he basically told her that she could not have John Lennon inside of his home. Again, textbook super final simp behavior, because he wants to have his own home and have his own head of household. And he was somebody who wanted to have his home in his order, and eventually wound up taking control. And again, as he took control over Julia eventually had to give John Lennon over to the Smiths, who had no children of their own. And basically, Mimi was a substitute mother looking to meet the emotional needs of John Lennon that his mother could not meet, because his mother was basically like a lot of black women running the streets. And as she was running the streets out here, what happened with John Lennon is that his primary care was from the Smiths, who were strict compared to John Lennon's very irresponsible mother. But the whole thing is that Smith himself was a bit of a beta male. And again, George Smith was a bit of a beta male because he really didn't have control over his household, was not able to establish control over his household, because Mimi had basically taken over with the whole drama with John and his mother, Julia. And that basically made it where they were in a situation where they were not able to maintain their home. That was a real problem with them. And that's what led to, again, John not really getting the structure that he needed, because the only way a boy can really get good structure is if he has his father in his life. An uncle can provide some, but again, if he's a beta male uncle like George was, he's not going to really get that structure that he needs and that emotional security, because he's not getting love from either of his parents. And that's what really happened with John Lennon and the home of Mimi. Mimi was trying to do what she could, but she was having problems with things as related to their home, because the husband that she was with was one of these beta males, and as a beta male, he basically wanted to leave the milk trade where he was making good money, and was making some pretty good money, to go into bookkeeping that he had no understanding about. And as he looked to try to do this, he was also participating in gambling. And as he participated in gambling, he basically was going for that poor man's jackpot, similar to Pookie playing CeeLo or poker. And what happened with Mimi's family is that they wound up struggling, and they were struggling for years. But the whole thing was, eventually John Lennon did get success as a Beatle, and as he got success as a Beatle, he did go back and reward Mimi for looking out for him. And just similar to the way Tupac was out here talking about his mama, and as he rewarded her, basically Mimi was taken care of in her older age, and taken care of after her husband died in 1955. This is where John Lennon came in, similar to the way son husbands come in, taking care of the women. And this was even though Mimi didn't really like his music, because she didn't really like his music and didn't like the way he was treating women. But he did go out here and try to do right by her. And sadly, even though he was doing right by her, he was still a man in crisis, not able to lead and set course for himself, because he didn't have that man in his life. However, he did go out and look to provide his Mimi an allowance of 30 pounds a week to take care of her, and eventually wound up buying her a home in New Zealand. And even though Mimi was a woman who was in crisis due to the dysfunctional way she had to deal with a life situation, she did go out and provide the structure for John Lennon to have some semblance of structure in his life, some semblance of order, and provided him with some teaching, and was the main architect of his success. Even though she did not like his music, she was the architect of his success because she was able to teach him some life skills, and she was basically a functional woman who had to come up and be what I call the cleanup woman. And again, cleanup woman is one of the things that put her in the road to becoming in crisis, because she wasn't able to go out here and fully be the helpmeet to her husband. She couldn't really fully commit to her husband because she had to clean up somebody's mess, and that mess basically is the one reason why Mimi Smith was a woman in crisis. A woman in crisis because she had to ironically solve other crises as related to her sister, a sister who basically was the one who put her son on the road to becoming a man in crisis, a man who basically, even though he got success, couldn't maintain that success because he didn't know how to be a man the way his father was taught not to be a man himself. Now, the third historical woman in crisis I'm going to be talking about is John Lennon's first wife, Cynthia Lennon. Now, Cynthia Lennon, as the first wife of John Lennon, sadly wound up on the same paradigm of dysfunctional relationships that his father wound up in, Alfred Lennon, in getting involved with a woman and not really having a course or direction to lead that woman in, one, and two, not being able to provide for that woman as a father, and not having any real interest in caring for that woman as a wife or a husband. Now, Cynthia Lennon sadly wound up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis, even though she was the youngest of 3 children to electric company employee Charles Powell, and also was living a nice middle-class life in Blackpool, England. Now, as Cynthia Powell was being taken care of by her father, sadly, her father was very ill with lung cancer, and after he wound up passing away, this is where Cynthia Powell wound up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis, because her father really wasn't there for her in her adolescent years to provide her guidance as a father, as related to courtships and relationships, because had he been there, he basically could have been able to vet John Lennon and keep his daughter away from this toxic man. Unfortunately, because Mr. Powell sadly wound up passing away when Cynthia was 16 years old, he basically was trying to look out for her by telling her to get a job to take care of her mother, and that would make it where she wouldn't be able to go to art school. However, her mother wanted her to get an education, so she rented out a room to apprentice electricians who stayed in that room, and this allowed Cynthia Powell to be able to go to the Liverpool College of Art, where she studied graphics, and this is where she wound up meeting John Lennon. Now, John Lennon was a beta male, and as a beta male, he basically wanted to have a woman who basically fit the fantasies he had in his rose-colored reality. And as he wanted to get a woman to fit his fantasies that fit his rose-colored reality, he wound up looking at Cynthia Powell, who was basically looking similar to him, like the French actress Brigitte Bardot, and he paid her that compliment. And after he paid her that compliment, he then, as one of these type of musician guys, then sang to her, and this basically made it where she became enamored with him, because when it comes to some women, they just get enamored because they're, one, getting attention, and two, this guy is one of these artsy guys, and this is where their hypergamy partially kicks in, because they think that this guy is going to go on to be a success, and a success that would possibly give them some attention, and that possibly could have been the covert contract that Cynthia Powell had as related to her attraction to John Lennon, and this is where she started her relationship with John Lennon, and as she started this attraction to John Lennon and this relationship with John Lennon, who changed her name from Cynthia to Cyn as related to his nickname, he then got involved with her, and eventually she wound up Yet he wound up ending an engagement to be with her because he was looking to have a relationship with another art student, Thelma Pickles, but decided to end that relationship because he just didn't want to go out here and be involved with her. But as she protested, he showed signs of dysfunction because he wound up assaulting Cynthia Powell, again, basically showing his insecurities and jealousy as related to things, as related to relationships. And then as he saw her dancing with another guy, this led to them breaking up for the first time. And eventually her artwork started to decline, and as she still tried to have this relationship with John Lennon, a relationship that really was not working, but she basically was trying to hold it up and trying to maintain this relationship. And as she was trying to hold up this relationship with John Lennon, she basically didn't understand that she was in a toxic relationship, and didn't understand this because, sadly, unlike Julia Lennon, who had a father who could see the toxicity in John Lennon that he saw in the father of Alfred Lennon, because there was no father there, what happened was Cynthia Powell continued to pursue a relationship with John Lennon, and as she continued to pursue this relationship with John Lennon, she eventually wound up getting pregnant with John Lennon's baby, and instead of the relationship being one out of love, the relationship became one out of obligation, mirroring that of the relationship that Alfred Lennon and Julia Lennon wound up having. Again, a relationship based on meeting the child's financial needs, but not really meeting the emotional needs of the other partner, and not really looking to really have a marriage that really meant anything, because the whole wedding was basically farcical. And again, farcical because the marriage really wasn't anything that John Lennon cared about. Again, he didn't really care about this relationship at all. No, he just did this out of obligation so that his son, Julian, would be seen as legitimate. And even though he had great success as a musician, sadly, John Lennon did not have really care for his son, Julian, and didn't really care about his son because as things were going on, the Beatles were becoming a very popular band. And as the Beatles became a popular band, he basically just abandoned his son, and abandoned his son by saying things like his son came out of a whiskey bottle, a Saturday night special. I mean, he had no respect or regard for his son Julian, or his mother Cynthia. Again, his mother really was treated just like a groupie. And when I look at John Lennon, he really reminds me a lot of Tupac Shakur and the way he basically treated a lot of the women in his life, in that he put his mother on a pedestal and made her into a god, and the same thing with his aunt, making them into gods, the older women, but he did not have respect or regard for the younger women in his life. And as he had no respect or regard for the woman in his life, basically Cynthia Powell, who became Cynthia Lennon, wound up in a really bad situation. A bad situation where she was basically trying to be looking for this man to be a leader and be a partner in a relationship. But this beta male, because he was just like a child, basically wanted to go out and be in the role of Arrested Development. He didn't want to lead his family, didn't even want people to know that he had a family, because that he thought it would hurt his image as a musician. So he had no respect for his wife, and he had no respect for the family she was trying to build, and he had no interest in being led by his family. He didn't even want to lead or take responsibility for his family. And as he was out here having all of this success, like his father before him, thought he could just buy his way out of things without ever caring for his woman. I mean, he bought his wife a Mini Cooper, a Porsche, a Ferrari, and a Volkswagen Beetle. I mean, he would buy her things, but he would not really be able to meet her emotional needs, and wasn't really thinking about meeting the emotional needs of his wife or taking care of his children. Again, didn't really look to take care of his family, and because he didn't want to take responsibility for his family, John Lennon began to escape by taking drugs like Preludin, smoking weed, and then taking LSD. And he wanted to take these drugs because he wanted to escape reality and escape the reality of his family and taking responsibility of his family, and even tried to coax his wife into taking LSD, but eventually she had enough with John Lennon and his inability to take responsibility as a man. No, all he was thinking about was making his music and looking to escape through things like his music or drugs, and that's what led to the marriage of Cynthia Lennon winding up deteriorating. And as that marriage wound up deteriorating, eventually what happened is that John Lennon started going out here having all sorts of casual sexual relations with groupies and all sorts of women, and that basically made it where their marriage just crumbled. And eventually, as their marriage wound up falling apart, she then started trying to deal with this whole situation of taking care of his son. But eventually, John Lennon, because he wanted to escape his responsibility, went over to India. And as he went to India, eventually, this is where Cynthia found out about the affair that John Lennon had had with Japanese artist and entertainer Yoko Ono. Now, as this happened, she eventually just got fed up with John Lennon and eventually found out about all the women he had, all the liaisons he had with groupies like Joan Baez, Eleanor Braun, and thousands of women across the globe, and also found out about the affair with Yoko Ono. And this is where she wound up looking to try to save her son but from all of this toxicity by eventually winding up divorcing John Lennon. Now, Cynthia Powell, who became Cynthia Lennon, again, she wound up becoming a woman in crisis, mainly because she didn't have that father there in her life who had passed away to vet a man, and because she didn't have that father there as related to the courtship process, she got in her feelings enamored over John Lennon, who basically was a pookie similar to the late Tupac Shakur. And while John Lennon could make great music, he could not lead as a man because his father didn't know how to teach him male life skills or male survival skills. And even though John Lennon had more money than his father, he was just as backwards as his father. And Cynthia wound up on the road to getting involved with this man the same way John Lennon's mother got involved with her, because there was nobody there to really protect her from things. And again, at least with Julia Lennon, there was a father who tried to protect her from this toxic man. But in the case of Cynthia Powell, there was no man. And that really reminds me of what happens to many black girls when they don't have a father in their lives. Again, without that father there to provide protection for them and to vet these men, they go from being women who have promise and success to winding up becoming women in crisis. Now, the fourth and final woman in crisis I'm going to be talking about in John Lennon's life is John Lennon's second ex-wife, Yoko Ono. Now, Yoko Ono wound up on the road to becoming a woman in crisis due to the trauma she endured when her family wound up falling apart in the aftermath of World War II. Now, Yoko Ono was born in Tokyo City in 1933 to Isokio Ono and Isuke Ono, who was a wealthy banker and classic pianist during the 1930s. Now, as she grew up in this middle-class lifestyle, eventually what happened is her family wound up moving to Japan, and then after they wound up moving to Japan, they wound up moving to America and San Francisco, and this is where Yoko Ono was taught piano from the age of 4 to the age of 12 to 13, and she also attended kabuki performances with her mother and learned about Japanese music and Japanese theater. And then as the family moved to New York in 1940, Isuke was transferred to, eventually from New York, they moved to Vietnam, which was called Indochina at the time, and the family did go to Japan. And throughout World War II, this is where Yoko Ono basically was in a situation where she suffered lots of trauma as the war was going on. And as a result of the bombings of Japan, eventually Yoko Ono was in a situation where her wealthy family, which was doing very well, eventually was forced to beg for food and had to pull their belongings in a wheelbarrow. And this is where Yoko Ono had to adapt survival skills that taught her that she needed to have an aggressive attitude and had to be an outsider. And this is what laid the foundation for her winding up becoming this alternative styled woman. Now, this whole alternative styled woman is basically similar to what happens to feminist indoctrinated women that I talk about in The Woman Crisis, because when it comes to feminist indoctrinated women, a lot of these women, because they go through great trauma and there's nobody there to meet their needs, because what happened with Yoko Ono's father is that he wound up becoming a prisoner of war in Vietnam, and after he became a prisoner of war in Vietnam, Yoko Ono had to wind up taking care of herself. And according to reports, her mother had to trade her German-made Swiss sewing machine for rice to feed the family. And and as the father was a prisoner of war in a Vietnamese or China, in a camp in China, he basically was a guy who was just stuck in a concentration camp. And this led to Yoko Ono thinking that she had to go out here and do for herself because nobody would do for her. The same mindset that many feminists wind up having. And this is where Yoko Ono went from being a child who was a child dealing with the traumas of war to a girl growing up to become a woman in crisis. Now, after the war ended, Yoko Ono remained in Japan as her family moved to the United States and settled in Scarsdale, New York. And as they settled in Scarsdale, eventually Yoko Ono went back to the Japanese school. And then after she went to the Japanese school, which was a Gakushin, she went to this school. She eventually took up singing as related to singing. She eventually graduated from Gakushin in 1951, accepted into a philosophy program at Gakushin University. But because she had been traumatized by war, because when it came to World War II, a lot of Japanese people were traumatized because they saw the bombings that by whites, and this is where Yoko Ono started to buy into white supremacy. And instead of her looking to stay at the Gakushin University, she decided to enroll at Sarah Lawrence College, and wanted to enroll at Sarah Lawrence College, I believe part of her survival needs and her hypergamy, looking to monkey branch to a community that she thought would give her more economic advantage, and looking to, again, participate in this, and also going out here and living a lifestyle her family didn't like, where she was looking to live this alternative lifestyle and pretending people that were outside of the wealth circle. And this is where Yoko Ono decided to elope with Japanese composer Toshi Ichihangi. And as she eloped with this man, again looking to rebel like the way feminist indoctrinated women want to do, and as she got married to this man, she showed textbook feminist indoctrinated behavior and looking to try to be the leader of the relationship, looking to be the boss of the relationship because she didn't trust the man that she was involved with. And as she was at this school, Sarah Lawrence College, she studied poetry and studied music. And as she got involved with these different types of people, she then got involved with many of these white individuals. As she was going to places like the new school and learning about Dadaism and other types of avant-garde art, she then was out here. She did a major performance at Carnegie Hall's Minor Hall, which was the recital hall, and this was where she did her experimental music. And as she was doing her experimental music, she then looked to get involved with a white man. Again, the natural hypergamy kicking in, because again, as a feminist indoctrinated woman looking out for her survival, she did not trust a man and did not want to submit to the leadership of a man. So as she was involved with this traditional Asian man, she didn't want to be involved with that Asian man, so she got involved with a white man, Anthony Cox, who was an American film producer and art promoter. And as she got involved with this man, this was just after she came out of a mental hospital for depression. She said that she suffered clinical depression from life, but I believe what happened with her was that she really wasn't looking at depression. She wasn't really depressed. She was just didn't want to submit to the authority of this Asian man. And because she didn't want to submit to his authority, this is what happened to her, is that she got what she says is depression. And what she was really down about was the fact that she didn't want to submit to this man who she wanted to divorce, and eventually wound up filing for divorce from this man in 1962. And that's when she decided to marry Anthony Cox. I mean, I find it interesting that she was out here and could be depressed about being involved with an Asian man, but was all eager to get involved with this white man, which shows me the disingenuousness about that whole statement of depression. And even though she was put in a Japanese mental institution, I really believe that what she was upset about was she not having to submit to the authority of an Asian man. And as the white man comes along, she's perfectly fine. And this is what led to her looking to marry Anthony Cox, but the marriage had to be annulled because she was already married to this other man. But eventually they wound up finalizing that divorce and married again in 1963, where she gave birth to her daughter by this white man, Kyoko Chan Cox. And this marriage wound up also falling apart because Yoko Ono, being one of these women who was indoctrinated into the feminist ideals before feminism, she didn't want to submit to this man and serve him and as related to his career. No, she wanted to have her own career, and she wanted to have her own career and wanted to have this career where she could be out here being her own woman and being the center of attention. And eventually this marriage wound up falling apart between Yoko Ono and Anthony Cox, and eventually there was a heated custody battle between Anthony Cox and Yoko Ono as related to their daughter Kyoko. And eventually what happened was the man, Cox, wound up disappearing with their 8-year-old daughter and eventually wound up being able to win custody after claiming that Yoko Ono was unfit to be a mother due to her drug use. But the whole thing is the whole marriage wound up falling completely apart and never really came together because Yoko Ono basically was one of these women who didn't want to follow the lead of a man or build a family. No, she wanted to be the center of fame and attention and wanted that attention for herself. And as she was looking to find a way to get out of submitting to the authority of Anthony Cox, she then monkey branched over to John Lennon, and monkey branched over to John Lennon for two reasons. One, John Lennon had higher social status than Anthony Cox. Two, he had more wealth than Anthony Cox. And three, he could provide her with the attention because of the fame he had as part of the Beatles. And because of her natural hypergamy, what Yoko Ono did was monkey branch over to John Lennon. And as she monkey branched over to John Lennon, she had no problem being with him because he would allow her to be able to continue being able to have that lifestyle she wanted to live. And he also allowed her one thing that Anthony Cox would not, in that he would look to submit to her authority. That was something that Yoko Ono really wanted as related to the relationship with a man. She was looking for a man who she could get to submit to her authority. And John Lennon basically not wanting to take responsibility as related to his own life. What he wanted was a codependent relationship where Yoko Ono could be sort of like a mother over him. And as he was out here with Yoko Ono, he saw a way to get out of the relationship that he had with Cynthia Lennon, who was looking for him to be a husband and a provider and take responsibility as a leader. He was looking to get out of a relationship where he had the lead and find one where he could follow. And that's where Yoko Ono was somebody who he found to be someone he could be attracted to because he could have the same codependent relationship he had with his aunt, Mimi, who basically was a relationship where he could submit to Mimi, his aunt. And that's what he was replicating with this relationship with Yoko Ono. And that's what made Yoko Ono attractive to him, even though Yoko Ono wasn't that good looking to begin with. But the relationship appeared to be one that he liked. And again, this is what basically led to the breakup of the Beatles, because John Lennon did not want to take responsibility as a man. And because he didn't want to take responsibility as a man, what happened was Yoko Ono began to take control, and as she began to take control over the life of John Lennon began to fall down the road to a decline as related to his career, and he wound up on this road to decline as related to his career because he wanted to have another surrogate mother, but this woman was basically a predator looking to prey on John Lennon. And as she preyed on John Lennon's creative career went into a state of decline as he left the Beatles to become a part of Yoko Ono's Plastic Ono band. a band that basically used plastic stands for recording purposes, and again had no real talent and no real really good music. It was basically hot garbage. But John Lennon stayed in this relationship with Yoko Ono, and as he stayed in this relationship with Yoko Ono, he basically had a place where he could have a mother to be over him as he took his drugs and was out here womanizing. And as he took his drugs and was out here womanizing, he was basically out here running these streets, and again, running these streets as related to things. Now, Yoko Ono wanted John Lennon to be a man, eventually herself, as related to taking responsibility. And as she was looking to do this, she was looking to have children with John Lennon. Now, she went through 4 miscarriages before eventually having her son, Sean. And John Lennon basically was only treating Sean well because he was a simp for Yoko Ono, who basically was coming across like a codependent mother in a son-husband relationship. And eventually John Lennon could go out and surrender his masculinity and allow himself to be emasculated by Yoko Ono. And Yoko Ono got more and more power over John Lennon to the point where things started to deteriorate because he was out here looking to continue going out here and being with other women and continuing to taking drugs, and was eventually about to get deported for drug charges because he was just continuing to smoke weed and take these hallucinogens. And eventually that relationship wound up falling completely apart, and Yoko Ono wound up divorcing John Lennon in 1973 or so. They wound up separating. And eventually his son, Sean, was born in 1975, but the whole thing is his relationship was falling apart. And eventually it was his side piece May Pang, that told him to go out and look out for his other son, Julian. And eventually Yoko Ono and John Lennon had a son, Sean, in 1975. And this is where he became a stay-at-home dad and hoped to try to be a father. But the whole thing is that John Lennon wasn't fit to be a father because he was a dysfunctional man, and Yoko Ono was looking to try to maintain a relationship with John Lennon, but she was only trying to keep it together because she wanted to be the center of attention and continue to get fame from John Lennon. There was never any real love that Yoko Ono had for John Lennon. No, in her hypergamy, she was looking to use the high status man to elevate herself to a springboard to another level in the entertainment industry, and look to elevate herself and make herself a star. But the whole thing is that Yoko Ono is seen by many people not as a star, but as the woman who created the decline of John Lennon, a decline that led to the death of John Lennon in 1980. And Yoko Ono looking to preserve his legacy, not out of love, but primarily because it was a way for her to make money. And eventually, around 1998, she did reconcile with her daughter. But Yoko Ono is a textbook example of a feminist, indoctrinated woman who is looking to basically be the leader in the relationship because she doesn't trust men. She doesn't trust men, and she uses men as tools to springboard and monkey branch on. She went from man to man, went from this Asian man to this white man, and then to John Lennon, and again was a textbook example of feminist, indoctrinated women being gold diggers, looking to get paid at the expense of men, and looking to get fame at the expense of men. This is what made Yoko Ono, sadly, the final stop for John Lennon as related to him being a man in crisis. I mean, he didn't know how to lead a family, did not know how to be a head of household, and just kept chasing women until he eventually found a woman who was just like the dysfunctional mother and aunt that he had. And sadly, instead of that woman being able to look out for him the way that his aunt did, this woman looked to use him. And this is where John Lennon went from being at the height of success in the music industry to sadly winding up getting preyed on by a female predator who was a textbook feminist, indoctrinated woman, a woman who basically put his life in crisis. Now, if you want to learn more about how feminist, indoctrinated women wind up on a dysfunctional life paradigm that leads to them winding up in dysfunctional and really troubling situations, you can pick up my book, The Woman Crisis, on Amazon.com. in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find The Woman Crisis at other online booksellers like Draft Digital, the iBookstore, Google Play, and you can find it in paperback at online booksellers like Barnes & Noble and in the Barnes & Noble's Nook, and you can also find it at big box retailers like Walmart and Target. And if you'd like to see me make another video about Hollywood historical women in crisis, you can send a donation of a minimum of $15 to the Patreon, the PayPal, or the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if I know something about that person, or I can do research on that person, I will make that video for you. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, All About Nikki, A Fabulous First Season. The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air meets Clueless in this absolutely fabulous African-American 1990s teen sitcom. Get all 13 episodes of All About Nikki, The Fabulous First Season in paperback and e-readers today. Now available in paperback. From the author of the critically acclaimed book, The Man Crisis, comes The Woman Crisis. Learn why so many women have become lost in their quest to have it all in The Woman Crisis. Get your copy of The Woman Crisis in paperback at Amazon.com and online booksellers today. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network, broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.